Canada is the second largest country on Earth, yet most people imagine it as a handful of cities: Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, surrounded by an infinite frozen nothing. That picture is not wrong, but it is wildly incomplete. This is a nation that stretches across 6 time zones, touches 3 oceans, and contains more than 2 million lakes. A country where you can drive for 12 hours and still be in the same province. A place that welcomes more immigrants per capita than almost any other nation on Earth, while also being home to some of the most remote, isolated communities anywhere in the developed world. Ask someone abroad what they know about Canada, and they will tell you it is polite, cold, and full of maple syrup. And it is. But that answer skips over nearly everything that actually matters. It skips over the fact that Canada's cities rank among the most expensive places to live on the planet. It skips over the reality that Indigenous communities in the north often lack clean drinking water in a country that holds 20% of the world's fresh water. It skips over a cultural landscape so diverse that in Vancouver, nearly half the population speaks a language other than English or French at home. Canadians themselves often describe their country with a quiet, self-deprecating pride. They know the winters are brutal. They know the housing market has gone mad. They know the distances are absurd. And yet, survey after survey, they rank among the happiest people in the world. How does that add up? In the next hour, we are going to cross this country from the rocky shores of Newfoundland to the ancient rainforests of British Columbia, from the Arctic tundra of Nunavut to the farmland of southern Ontario. We will not be visiting the postcard Canada. We will be looking at how people actually live, what they eat, where they work, how they raise families, and what keeps them here when the January temperature hits 40 below. If you want to see the real Canada, not the tourist version, not the cliché, subscribe now and let us take you there. To understand life in Canada, you have to understand the land itself, because the land does not make it easy. Canada's geography is not a backdrop. It is the main character in every Canadian story. The country sits on the Canadian Shield, a massive plate of ancient rock that covers nearly half the nation. This is some of the oldest stone on Earth, more than 4 billion years in places, scraped clean by glaciers and dotted with countless lakes. In northern Ontario and Quebec, the Shield creates a landscape so rugged that building roads or railways through it took generations. Move east and you reach the Atlantic provinces: Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Prince Edward Island, and Newfoundland and Labrador. Here, the ocean shapes everything. The Bay of Fundy, between New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, has the highest tides on the planet, rising and falling as much as 16 meters twice a day. Fishing communities along these coasts have lived by the same rhythms for centuries, though those rhythms are changing as ocean temperatures shift and fish stocks move. The center of the country, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and much of Alberta, is the Prairies. Flat does not mean empty. This is some of the most productive farmland in the world, a sea of wheat and canola that turns brilliant yellow in summer. But the prairies also produce extreme weather: summer tornadoes, winter blizzards, and temperature swings of 60 degrees Celsius between seasons. In Winnipeg, a January cold snap and a July heat wave can be separated by only 6 months. Then the land rises. The Rocky Mountains cut through Alberta and British Columbia like a wall, with peaks exceeding 4,000 meters. West of the mountains is a different world entirely. temperate rainforest, Pacific coastline, and a climate so mild that Victoria on Vancouver Island rarely sees snow. British Columbia alone contains ecosystems ranging from desert in the Okanagan Valley to subarctic tundra in the northern interior. And then there is the North. Yukon, the Northwest Territories, and Nunavut together make up nearly 40% of Canada's landmass, but hold fewer than 150,000 people. This is a world of permafrost and polar bears, where the sun does not set for weeks in summer and barely rises in winter. In Iqaluit, the capital of Nunavut, supplies arrive by sea lift once a year when the ice breaks. From the pounding surf of Tofino to the frozen shores of Hudson Bay, Canada's geography does not just shape how people live, it decides whether they can live there at all. Daily life in Canada changes dramatically depending on where you wake up and what month it is. In downtown Toronto, the morning starts early and moves fast. Commuters pack into the Toronto Transit Commission, the TTC, or crawl along the Gardiner Expressway, one of the most congested highways in North America. Coffee is essential. Tim Hortons, the iconic Canadian chain, sells 8 out of every 10 cups of coffee consumed outside the home nationwide. The morning double-double, a coffee with 2 creams and 2 sugars, is practically a national ritual. 3,000 kilometers west, in Vancouver, the day begins differently. Residents on the North Shore might start with a hike through temperate rainforest before heading to the office. The city is wedged between mountains and ocean, and outdoor life is woven into the workday. You will see people kayaking in English Bay before 9 in the morning and cycling home along the Stanley Park seawall after 5. In the maritime provinces, life moves at a different pace. In Lunenburg, Nova Scotia, a UNESCO World Heritage town, fishing boats leave the harbor before dawn, as they have done since the town was founded in 1753. The rhythm is set by tides and seasons, not by office hours. In Newfoundland, the concept of island time is real. If someone says they will meet you at noon, they might arrive at 12:30 and nobody will comment on it. In Quebec, the day has a distinct texture shaped by language and culture. French is the dominant language, and daily interactions, buying groceries, reading road signs, overhearing cafe conversations, happen in French. In Montreal, the city's famous bagel shops fire up their wood-burning ovens before sunrise, producing a denser, sweeter bagel than its New York cousin. For many Indigenous communities, daily life blends modern routines with traditional practices. In the Cree communities of northern Quebec, hunting and trapping remain part of the seasonal cycle. In Haida Gwaii, off the coast of British Columbia, Haida carvers continue to produce totem poles and canoes, passing knowledge through generations. And everywhere, the weather is a constant conversation. Canadians check the forecast the way people elsewhere check sports scores. In Calgary, a Chinook, a warm wind descending from the Rockies, can raise the temperature by 20 degrees in a single afternoon. In Ottawa, winter means skating to work on the Rideau Canal, the world's largest naturally frozen skating rink, stretching nearly 8 kilometers through the heart of the capital. The Canadian dream of home ownership has become one of the country's most painful subjects. In Toronto and Vancouver, the average home price has crossed the $1 million mark, pushing ownership out of reach for an entire generation of young families. A modest detached house in Vancouver's east side can sell for well over $1.5 million. The same money could buy a mansion in Saskatoon or a waterfront property in rural Nova Scotia. But the jobs that pay well enough to afford either are concentrated in the cities where housing costs the most. This pressure has reshaped how Canadian families live. Multi-generational households, grandparents, parents, and children under one roof are becoming common again, especially in immigrant communities in the Greater Toronto Area and Metro Vancouver. In Brampton, Ontario, and Surrey, British Columbia, it is not unusual to find 3 generations sharing a home, pooling resources to manage the mortgage. Away from the major cities, the picture shifts. In Winnipeg, a family can still buy a decent house for under $400,000. In Atlantic Canada, prices are even lower, though job opportunities are scarcer. In St. John's, Newfoundland, generations of families have lived in the same brightly painted row houses known as jelly bean houses, clinging to the steep hills above the harbour. In the north, the housing situation is entirely different and far more difficult. In Nunavut, overcrowding is a crisis. The territory's harsh climate and short construction season make building homes extraordinarily expensive. A basic 3-bedroom house can cost 3 to 4 times what it would in the south. Many Inuit families live in homes with 10 or more people, a reality that affects health, education, and quality of life. The federal government has acknowledged this as a national emergency, but progress is slow. Indigenous communities across Canada face similar housing challenges. On many reserves, homes are in critical need of repair, and water infrastructure is inadequate. The community of Neskantaga First Nation in Northern Ontario has been under a boil water advisory since 1995, nearly 3 decades. Yet amid these pressures, family bonds remain strong. Canadian parents receive up to 18 months of shared parental leave. Community centres, libraries, and public rinks serve as gathering places. In Quebec, subsidized daycare costs as little as $9 a day, a policy that has transformed workforce participation for mothers and become a model other provinces are slowly adopting. Canadian food is often described as hard to define, and that is exactly what makes it interesting. There is no single national dish. Instead, there is a patchwork of regional specialties and immigrant influences that tell the story of the country itself. Start in Quebec, where poutine, French fries, topped with cheese curds and brown gravy, has evolved from rural roadside fare to a national obsession. Across the province, sugar shacks serve meals drenched in maple syrup during the spring harvest, a tradition dating back to Indigenous communities who taught early settlers how to tap maple trees. Move east to the Maritimes and the menu changes entirely. Lobster, once considered poor people's food and fed to prisoners, is now a delicacy exported worldwide. In Nova Scotia, the lobster roll, cold lobster meat in a buttered bun, is a summer staple. In Newfoundland, Jig's dinner, salt beef boiled with cabbage, potatoes, and peas pudding, reflects the province's Irish and English roots, while cod tongues and scruncheons speak to a resourceful fishing culture. In the Prairies, Ukrainian immigrants brought pierogies and cabbage rolls, now served at church basements and community halls from Winnipeg to Saskatoon. Alberta beef is legendary. Ranches stretching across the foothills produce some of the finest cattle in the world. Then there is the West Coast, where the food culture has been shaped by Asia. Vancouver's dim sum restaurants rival those of Hong Kong. Sushi is ubiquitous and often remarkably affordable. The city's Granville Island public market is a sensory explosion of fresh seafood, artisan cheese, and produce from the Fraser Valley. Indigenous food traditions are experiencing a renaissance. Bannock, a simple fried bread, is served at powwows and community gatherings across the country. Wild game, salmon, berries, and wild rice have sustained First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples for thousands of years. Restaurants like Saskatoon's Wanuskewin and Vancouver's Salmon and Bannock are bringing these foods to a broader audience. And then there is the Tim Hortons factor. It is not fine dining. It is a cultural institution. The chain, founded by a hockey player in Hamilton, Ontario, now has more locations per capita in Canada than McDonald's has in the United States. Canadians line up in drive-thrus at 6 in the morning, in blizzards, for a coffee and a donut, and they would not have it any other way. Canada's economy is often described as resource-rich and service-driven, and both halves of that equation shape where and how people work. The resource sector built this country. In Alberta, the oil sands around Fort McMurray have generated enormous wealth and enormous controversy. Workers fly in from across the country for 2-week shifts, earning 6-figure salaries, while the environmental cost is debated in boardrooms from Calgary to Ottawa. When oil prices crash, entire communities feel it immediately. In the same province, cattle ranching remains a way of life. South of Calgary, the foothills are dotted with ranches that have been operated by the same families for over a century. Cowboys are not a costume here, they are working people. Northern Ontario's mining towns, Sudbury, Timmins, Thunder Bay, produce nickel, gold, and copper that feed global supply chains. Sudbury's landscape was once compared to the surface of the moon, scarred by a century of smelting. In recent decades, a massive re-greening effort has transformed it, a testament to what happens when industry and environmentalism find common ground. On the coasts, fishing and forestry dominate. British Columbia's lumber feeds construction across North America. In New Brunswick, the forestry sector employs thousands, though automation and market shifts have changed the landscape. The cod fishery in Newfoundland collapsed in 1992, putting 30,000 people out of work overnight, one of the largest mass layoffs in Canadian history. The province has never fully recovered, though it is now rebuilding around offshore oil, technology, and a growing tourism sector. Canada's knowledge economy is concentrated in a few urban corridors. Toronto Waterloo is the country's tech hub, home to Shopify, OpenText, and a dense network of startups. Montreal has become a global center for artificial intelligence research. Vancouver's film industry, Hollywood North, employs thousands in animation, visual effects, and production. The public sector is a massive employer. 1 in 5 Canadian workers is employed by government at some level, federal, provincial, or municipal. Ottawa, as the capital, is a company town where the company is government. Yet for all this diversity, economic opportunity is not evenly spread. Youth unemployment in parts of Atlantic Canada and the North runs persistently higher than the national average. And the gig economy, Uber drivers, food delivery couriers, freelance creatives, has arrived in Canada with the same precariousness it brings everywhere else. Canadians do not broadcast their social lives loudly, but community runs deep, and it often runs through ice. Hockey is not just a sport in Canada. It is a shared language. In small towns from Red Deer, Alberta, to Miramichi, New Brunswick, the local rink is the center of social life. Parents wake at 5 in the morning to drive their children to practice. On Saturday nights, families gather around televisions for Hockey Night in Canada, a broadcast tradition that has run uninterrupted since 1952. When the Canadian men's or women's team plays for Olympic gold, the country essentially stops. Beyond hockey, each season brings its own rituals. Summer means the cottage, the cabin, or the camp, and nearly every Canadian family has access to some version of this. In Ontario, entire highways clog on Friday afternoons as city dwellers flee to Muskoka or the Kawathas. In Quebec, going up north to a chalet in the Laurentians is a weekend rite. Even in the Prairies, families drive hours to a lakeside cabin that is little more than a shack, because that shack sits on water, and that water means swimming, fishing, and fires at sunset. Festivals mark the calendar. The Calgary Stampede draws over 1 million visitors each July for 10 days of rodeo, concerts, and pancake breakfasts, riding, roping, and country music. In Quebec City, the Winter Carnival transforms the old city into a snow-covered wonderland with ice palaces, canoe races across the frozen St. Lawrence River, and the iconic bonhomme, a giant snowman mascot beloved across the province. Ottawa's Winterlude features ice sculpture competitions and the frozen Rideau Canal Skateway. Indigenous powwows take place across the country, from the Six Nations of the Grand River in Ontario to the Enoch Cree Nation in Alberta. These gatherings feature drumming, traditional dance, and regalia that have been passed down through families. They are both spiritual ceremony and community reunion, and visitors are welcomed. And there is the quiet side of Canadian social life. The backyard barbecue, the Tim Hortons run with friends, the long conversation over a beer at a local pub when the temperature finally climbs above freezing. In Newfoundland, kitchen parties, informal gatherings around someone's kitchen table, often with fiddles and accordions, are a living tradition. The rule is simple. Everyone is welcome, and someone will probably pour you a drink of Screech rum. For all its reputation as a peaceful, prosperous nation, Canada faces deep and persistent challenges, and acknowledging them is not unpatriotic. It is necessary. Housing is at the top of the list. In Toronto and Vancouver, the median home now costs more than 10 times the median household income. Young families are being pushed further and further from city centres into 2-hour commutes and bedroom communities that lack infrastructure and services. Renters fare no better. Vacancy rates in major cities hover near 1%, and average rents have doubled in some neighbourhoods over the last decade. The cost of living extends beyond housing. Groceries in the north can cost 3 to 4 times what they cost in the south. In Nunavut, a 4-litre jug of milk can run $17, a bag of apples $12. For communities already struggling with poverty and food insecurity, these prices are devastating. Healthcare is a source of national pride and national frustration. Canada's single-payer system guarantees access regardless of income, but wait times for specialists and elective surgeries have grown steadily. In rural and remote areas, finding a family doctor can take years. In parts of Newfoundland and the Territories, patients travel hundreds of kilometers for basic medical appointments. Reconciliation with Indigenous peoples remains the country's most profound unfinished business. The legacy of residential schools, institutions that forcibly separated Indigenous children from their families for more than a century, continues to echo through generations. The discovery of unmarked graves at former school sites in Kamloops, British Columbia, and Marieville, Saskatchewan, has forced a national reckoning that is only beginning. Access to clean water on reserves, inadequate housing, and overrepresentation in the justice system are not historical problems. They are current realities. Climate change is transforming the North faster than anywhere else on the planet. In Tuktoyaktuk, Northwest Territories, the permafrost is melting and the coastline is eroding. Houses are sinking. The ice roads that connect remote communities in winter are freezing later and thawing earlier, shrinking the window for delivering supplies. Income inequality has widened. The gap between Canada's richest and poorest neighbourhoods is growing, and the middle class feels squeezed from both directions. In Toronto, food bank visits have hit record levels, and a growing number of those visitors are employed full-time. Canada is a country caught between two versions of itself and learning to hold both at once. Nowhere is this tension more visible than in the relationship between resource development and environmental protection. The Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion in British Columbia pitted economic interests and Indigenous communities against each other, with some First Nations supporting the project for the revenue it would bring and others opposing it on environmental and cultural grounds. The debate is not abstract. It plays out in town halls, courtrooms, and protests from Burnaby to the BC interior. In the energy sector, Alberta's oil sands represent both economic engine and environmental liability. The province's identity is tied to oil. Its license plates still read Wild Rose Country. Yet the same province is now also a leader in wind and solar energy development, with massive wind farms stretching across the southern plains near Pincher Creek and Lethbridge. Quebec embodies another kind of duality, the ongoing negotiation between French identity and the English-speaking world that surrounds it. Language laws in Quebec require businesses to operate primarily in French and restrict access to English language education. For some Quebecers, these laws protect a culture that would otherwise be swallowed by a continent of English speakers. For others, they are restrictive. The debate has defined Quebec politics for generations and shows no sign of fading. Indigenous communities navigate perhaps the most complex balance of all. In many First Nations, traditional languages are being revived after decades of suppression. Young people are learning to hunt, trap, and harvest traditional foods, while also earning university degrees and building careers in law, medicine, and technology. The challenge is not choosing between tradition and modernity. It is finding a way to carry both forward. Canada's cities reflect this duality too. In Toronto and Vancouver, glass skyscrapers rise beside neighborhoods where old immigrant communities have maintained their languages, groceries, and festivals for generations. You can walk from a dim sum restaurant to a Ukrainian church to a mosque in the space of 20 minutes. And this is not unusual. It is just a Tuesday. And in the Atlantic provinces, fishing villages that once seemed frozen in time are now connected to global markets and social media. Young people leave for opportunities out west, but many return, bringing back skills, savings, and a renewed appreciation for a slower way of life. Given everything, the brutal winters, the housing crisis, the vast distances, the uncomfortable truths about the country's history, the question becomes obvious. Why do people stay? The answer is not simple. It is not one thing, but it is real. Part of it is the land itself. The first time you stand on the edge of the Rocky Mountains in Jasper or Banff, looking at peaks that have stood for millions of years, something shifts. The scale of the Canadian landscape has a way of putting human problems into perspective. That view of the Rockies at dawn, or the northern lights dancing over Yellowknife, or the autumn colors across the Laurentians, does not solve anything practical, but it reminds you why this place is worth protecting. Part of it is community. In a country where the nearest neighbor might be kilometers away, people look out for each other. In small towns across Saskatchewan and Manitoba, when a farmer falls ill during harvest, the entire community shows up to bring in the crop. In Newfoundland, when a family loses their home to fire, the town raises money before anyone has to ask. This is not nostalgic myth. It happens. Part of it is the quiet promise of multiculturalism. Canada is not a melting pot. It is more like a mosaic, where different cultures are encouraged to keep their identities rather than dissolve into one. Toronto is often cited as the most multicultural city on Earth, with more than half its population born outside Canada. In a world of rising nationalism and closed borders, Canada's experiment in diversity, imperfect as it is, represents something genuinely hopeful. And part of it is something harder to name, a sense of possibility. Canada is a young country, still writing its own story. The unfinished business of reconciliation, the debates over energy and climate, the struggle to make cities affordable. These are not signs of failure. They are signs of a nation that is still deciding what it wants to be. People stay because the country asks something of them. It asks for resilience, for tolerance, for patience with winter and with distance and with each other. And in return, it offers space, physical, cultural, psychological, to build a life on your own terms. Canada is not paradise. Anyone who tells you it is has never tried to find affordable housing in Vancouver or endured a Winnipeg February. But it is a country where the fundamental things, clean air, safe streets, good schools, a voice in how you are governed, are not luxuries. They are the shared starting point. And that, for millions of people from every corner of the world, is reason enough to call it home. If this journey across Canada gave you a new perspective on the land, the people, the challenges, and the quiet resilience that holds it all together, subscribe to Tour Guide. We take you places the postcards never show. Explore more, worry less,